Previously on the Strife channel, making the events of Season 1 last roughly 3 months long.
兄様が上京して早3ヶ月
3 months long. I am him. And I totally didn't forget that this was already revealed in chapter 25.5 when making that video. Anyway, we're back with another timeline video for Granblue Season 2. I highly recommend watching the Season 1 version of this video for a solid foundation, as I'll be heavily referencing and building upon that video in this one. With that being said, let's not waste any more time and get into analyzing. Starting with episode 1, in the manga this chapter actually takes place a decent amount of time after the Okinawa arc, as the anime omitted this sequence from chapter 21.5, where it introduces the Omi Women's University Festival arc into the manga, which you can see on screen is during the flight back from Okinawa, making it July 3rd per the first video. Back to the anime, Season 2 opens with an anime exclusive diving sequence with Iori and Chisa to ease the viewers back into the world of Granblue, after a 7-year wait since Season 1 aired, and after the new banger opening that admittedly doesn't slap as hard as the first one, because let's be real, that's a Herculean task in of itself. The anime adapts chapter 25.5 instead of 22 through 25 first, aka the Omi Women's University Festival arc, which if you're wondering, Season 1 adapted the first 5 volumes of Granblue, aka chapters 1 through 21.5. Which they did also reorder 21.5 to be earlier as well. Personally, I'm fine with reordering chapter 25.5 here, as it's an extra chapter which we've established previously are out of order in the manga's chronology. With that being said, a clue reveals itself instantly in Shiori's letter, when she mentions that it's been 3 months since Iori moved to Izu, which completely lines up with all of my research and speculation from the previous video. Which, mind you, there's no official timeline for Granblue anywhere, just mine, since I'm the only person obsessed with this IP enough to make something like this. Just something to keep in mind in case things don't line up and or are inconsistent down the line. Unfortunately, that happens right now, as we do run into a roadblock from this line from Iori, when he writes this in his letter back to Shiori. What the hell? How? Let's set aside my timeline for a second and just go off of what's explicitly and officially in the manga and anime only. We know for a fact that Iori moves to Izu in April, and it's now confirmed that 3 months has passed since then, meaning the current time must be somewhere in July. And doing some light research, we can see that summer 2018 in Japan started on June 21st. Usually by this point I'd play the unreliable narrator card here, but A, Shiori just straight up is not one. And B, after Iori writes that line, neither Nanaka nor Chisa dispute it, which makes me think that Iori is somehow correct in this instance. However, at the same time, I have one single possible defense for my video, and in turn the consistency of the timeline at large here, when Iori says this line afterwards. If taken literally, you can really stretch it to imply that he wasn't telling the truth prior, and prior includes that line about it being nearly summer. Though, to use this conclusion, we have to assume that Nanaka and Chisa either straight up ignored or didn't react to it being a lie in the first place. Either way, it's up to you to decide what's right here, as the discrepancy variance results in only 2 or so weeks, which isn't terrible in my opinion. Anyway, that long ass tangent aside, this plotline seems to take place after an unspecified time skip following the end of Season 1. As remember, this is an extra chapter in the manga, so the dates are technically unknown. However, thanks to Shiori, we at least have a general time frame of it still being in July, likely within the first 2 weeks or so. After the letter plotline begins the house-sitting plotline, which seems to have had a little time skip as well in between them. But you'll learn that we do have a date for this, as A, it's currently raining at Granblue, whereas it was sunny during the letter plotline. B, it's revealed that Kohei and Aina show up to Granblue during a week without a club meeting, which is revealed to have been discussed at last week's meeting, further reinforcing that some time has passed since the end of Season 1, since they would have had enough time to return to Izu and also hold a meeting as well, which we've established are sometimes on Saturdays and now could also be weekly as well. And C, Aina asks where Nanaka and Toshio are, in which Chisa replies with that they're on a work trip. Reasons B and C already imply a passage of time, but if we refer to our best friends for these kinds of timeline videos, we can see that rainy days in Izu July 2018 include the 5th and 6th, along with a little on the 9th and 12th, and on the 28th, and on the beginning of the 29th. Let's use a process of elimination to zero in on these dates here. Considering it's currently daytime, that kills off the 12th and 29th, leaving us with the 5th, 6th, 9th, and 28th. Referring back to the anime real quick, we can see a clock in this shot, meaning that the first year started prepping dinner at what appears to be 4 p.m. And later we can also see that Kohei and Aina leave Grand Blue after dinner, while it's still raining, which quickly eliminates the 6th and 9th now, as neither dates had rained past the morning, let alone 4 p.m. Additionally, to be thorough, while we don't know if it's raining later at night to eliminate the 5th, we do at least get a time frame of when Iori and Chisa both turn in at 12:05 a.m. the next day. Additionally, we can see that it stopped raining the next morning when Nanaka and Toshio return to Grand Blue, which honestly doesn't help us narrow down the dates too much, as we don't know what time they arrive at, because both the 6th and 29th were generally clear days, but still had rain early in the morning. Though personally, I'm leaning more towards the 5th and 6th for this plotline's two dates, which I won't be able to explain until we get to episode 5 and 9 in this video. And this would mean that the letter plotline has to have been on July 4th then, which doesn't necessarily contradict the meeting lines, but now that only works if Peekaboo held a meeting during the trip, which isn't impossible technically. To recap, season 1 ends on July 3rd with Peekaboo returning from Okinawa, the letter plotline occurs on the 4th, and the house sitting plotline takes place on the 5th, and continues on to the 6th. Alright, before we move on to episode 2, something worth noting is, the sandwich board in Grand Blue no longer reads that there is a 2018 event anymore, and this honestly feels like a deliberate change from the animators for season 2 in an IRL context, as it would be a bit odd to have your 2025 anime explicitly stating that it's set 7 years prior. That it's literally the only thing that's altered on the sandwich board altogether. Either way, it's still very overwhelmingly obvious that season 2 is still set in 2018, regardless of this change. Unless Zero G pulls off another 2018 festival situation and moves up the anime's time from to 2025, which would really ruin all of my hard work. And then I'd have to assume that the cast are all time travelers at that point. Now to episode 2. Episode 2 is a simple 3-dater that picks up exactly where episode 1 ends, with Shiori arriving at Grand Blue, to the surprise of her family members living there. After meeting Peekaboo, Shiori gives us a tiny bit of cope validation regarding what I said previously, about how Iori might have been lying about it being not summer yet, when she says this.
なので全て嘘だと確信してここに来ました。
Like, yeah, this obviously could be hyperbole, or she might not have been including the summer line here, but there's really not a lot to go off of, as I'm sure Inoue Kenji never expected anyone to ever overanalyze this piece of dialogue. But here we are. But at the same time also, despite having an ulterior motive, Shiori is very much not an unreliable narrator. Mainly because, you know, she has a doll capable of surveillance. That aside, later when Iori is trying to remove her sister, Aina drops this line.
そんなの別に少しくらい。
Just remember this for the remainder of this section on episode 2. Later, before Peekaboo could play Hanky Drop, Iori finds out what chloroform smells like and wakes up the next day. I should note that we don't have any clock or time indicators for this whole episode, but we do at least know that it was morning/noon when he was knocked out based on the sunlight. And since we know that he woke up the next morning, this would mean that he's been unconscious for a really long time. Not really relevant to the timeline aspect, but it's kind of insane how all of Peekaboo just went with it. Either way, we get a micro clue from Toshio later when he notes that Iori is up early. And if you recall from season 1, Iori's average wake up time is around 9 AM. And yes, I'm including episode 1 where he naturally woke up without the help of an alarm, albeit after binge drinking with Tokita and Kotobuki. Point is, we can easily assume that it's currently before 9 AM. Later, after Shiori tries to sabotage her brother's living situation, Iori says this.
そういえば昨日入ってないし
Which does indeed confirm that one day has passed since Shiori's arrival. Plot happens, and when diving, Shiori notes that it rained recently, which reconfirms that very little time has passed since the house-sitting plotline of episode 1, which is later reinforced when Nanaka says this.
雨が降った後だから。
After the dives, and in turn the excellent interaction between Shiori and her uncle, that really brings the heart that Grand Blue's story is really good at crafting, we get a flashback scene of the Kitahara's childhood. I know usually I'd get a hard-on for full moon shots, but there's no way I'll be able to calculate when this is, because we don't even know what year this flashback takes place in, though if I were to make an educated guess, I'm confident to say that this is before 2000 2008 at the very least. Allow me to explain. The only other shot we have of Iori's childhood was in episode 1 of season 1, where Chisa reminisces about how the last time she saw him was 10 years ago. 2018 minus 10, 2008. And in comparing how Iori looks in both scenes, I think it's safe to say he looks younger in the Shiori one, as his face is wider and his hair shorter, which correlates with the big anime rule of higher age equals longer hair. Okay, this part's gonna get a little, yeah. Like I said earlier, this episode spans 3 days, which is true in the manga and anime, as after the peak heartfelt sibling sequence in day 2 is the morning that Shiori goes home on, aka day 3, meaning her day 2 at Grand Blue has ended off screen, and this is where the anime and the manga fight. No, not each other, but me. It's like a goddamn 2v1 out here. Why? Because there's an establishing shot of the full moon, right before the one of Grand Blue in the daytime, while the anime cuts the full moon one out entirely. Why is this a problem? Well, you see, if we refer to our trusty moon chart, July 2018 had a full moon on the 27th. Oh hey, look at that. If we go with the latter rainy day estimate from episode 1, that it took place on the 28th and 29th, this would be very, very close to that full moon date. Meaning if the anime included it, it would easily lock in those dates. But since it cut it, it no longer works anymore. But also remember, in these timeline videos, anime takes precedence. So we'll stick with the 5th and 6th instead again. And if you're curious what else has changed between the manga and anime, I actually have a complete series of short videos showing every change, along with hidden details and Easter eggs. So watch that after this one, because I like money. Anyway, back to episode 2. To recap, it starts on the same day where episode 1 ends on, with Shiori arriving in Izu. This would be on July 6th. After meeting Peekaboo and drugging her brother, the day changes to the 7th, where Shiori goes on her first dive, and Iori finally gets his diving license, along with Shiori finally realizing that her older brother isn't as bad as she initially thought. And finally, the next day, the 8th, Shiori returns home, and that's where the episode ends. Okay. I neglected mentioning it up until now, but what I feared came true. Kohei is a goddamn time traveler. Why, you ask? In these 2 shots of him offering Iori money, he holds Series F banknotes, which didn't enter circulation until July 3rd, 2024. How does Kohei have this? Usually by now I would have thought the Scumbros had a hand in forgery or some other underhanded tactic, but the problem is the designs of the Series F bills weren't announced until 2019, making that impossible as well. Meaning it seems now we're either in 2018 or 2024/5 now. Like any of my good videos, it's coping time. When Iori says, I'm just gonna assume he's as confused as I am about why Kohei has bills from the future. Obviously I know within the context of the show this isn't the case, but I'm desperate, man. Jokes aside, to keep my sanity, we'll stick with the 2018 time frame still for the remainder of the series. Episode 3 has a very limited amount of timeline clues, but we at least know that it spans across 2 days. Usually when episodes are connected, the latter starts where the former leaves off, but in episode 3's case, it actually starts a little before the end of 2, as it overlaps with when Shiori leaves for home via car, but before she gets on the train at the end of episode 2. That being said, a little later into the day, presumably around noontime, Iori and Chisa return to Grand Blue after getting dropped off by Nanaka, and Peekaboo, minus the Kotegawa sisters, play the association game. During it, Iori literally outplays Aina, and it leads to her getting blackout drunk. Plot happens and Nanaka returns to overhear Iori's inner thoughts, and the first half of the episode ends. The second half has a 1-day time skip into the morning of the following day, where we get a look at Aina's apartment. Here, Chisa essentially confirms that a day has passed when she mentions that Aina got sick due to passing out during the association game plotline. We flash back to Grand Blue and we get a few hints from Iori as to what the weather is like today, as he mentions that it's currently hot, and Nanaka, agrees-ish? Skipping ahead a little, there's a scene where it's somewhat windy outside, well enough to blow wetsuits. He then goes outside to grab them, which would allow Iori to confirm or deny the speculation he made prior to Nanaka. This next part's gonna be an assumption, but kinda like an educated guess. Nanaka and Iori eat somen for lunch, which is basically cold noodles, and are typically eaten during hot weather. This would further corroborate with Iori's passing comments from earlier. So now that we know that, let's check the weather records for Izu in 2018 again, so we can see that if this is at the start of July or beginning of August. When comparing the 2 possible dates of July 10th and August 2nd, the more likely of the 2 would be July 10th here, as it had more wind and was slightly less cloudy. That works out perfectly if the association game truly was on the 9th. However, in Neither dates were overwhelmingly sunny though, and while 90 is pretty warm, 97 is actually hot. Later during lunch, the manga has a classic broken Grand Blue 2:05 clock in it, but since that time would make sense for this scene, unlike episode 4 of season 1, I'm just gonna go with it here. Later, Azusa visits to save Iori because she's literally her, and at night, the three of them go to Bar Roots to drink with Tokita and Kotobuki. And we get one of Grand Blue's finest scenes of all time here, which genuinely made me feel really happy the first time I read it. And then we flash back to Aina's apartment with an establishing shot of out of frame moonlight. And then the episode ends. Anyway, to recap, episode 3 starts off before episode 2 ends. Wow, that feels really weird to say. With Shiori returning home and is followed by the association game plotline during the first half of the episode, which would mean that this would be July 9th. And the second half of the episode occurs the following day, aka July 10th, where Azusa not only fixes Iori's relationship with Nanaka, but also gives him good old-fashioned Grand Blue Senpai advice. Alright, that was episode 3, a short and simple 2-dayer. Let's go to 4 now. There's an unspecified time skip between episode 3 and 4. However, we do know that episode 4 spans over 2 consecutive days. It certainly doesn't make it any easier when you remember that if we're to go off of the manga's chronology, this episode should have been at the start of season 2. Anyway, the episode opens in the afternoon of a brand new day after episode 3, at some time before, I don't know, let's say 2:04 p.m. Aina points out that the girls really never get a chance to spread their wings during parties, and proposes a girls only one. When walking to Chisa's room to hold said party, we get to see a glimpse of Nanaka's room, in which there's an armless clock in it. However, in the manga, the arms are there. Yay! And it reads about 2:04 p.m. See what I did there? The party plays out and we have to go off the manga again for timeline clues. When Iori and Kohei say these 2 lines after getting kicked out of the party, which was cut from the anime for some reason. Anyway, remember these lines for a little later. And afterwards, we get a clue that the girls' party went to nighttime based on the last panel of chapter 22. Anyway, the day passes, which we can tell based on various clues here, namely Toshio, Nanaka, and Iori's morning greetings, along with referencing the girls' party happening yesterday when talking about Nanaka. Something else to note is Iori is wearing the same thing he did in the second half of episode 1 of this season, specifically the clothes he changed into after showering and before bed, which we can assume is his outfit of choice for comfort, which I'll be touching upon in a little bit. So remember this too, along with the Tomorrow Sob lines. Anyway, after Nanaka vaguely threatens Iori, the first half of the episode ends. In the second half, we flash to Izuyu in the same day. I'll get to it soon, trust. And we get 4 rapid fire time skips during the points of before first period, before second period, during lunch, and at the end of the academic day, which you soon will know is around 3 p.m. Okay, let's talk about Iori and Kohei's line from earlier now. They mentioned that they'd try again tomorrow, aka today right now. And we know that this is because of the sobbing done throughout all 4 of the time skips previously mentioned. Since these lines were cut from the anime, it'd make it a lot harder to know that the current day happens immediately after the girls' plotline. Not only that, we also now know that the morning after the party, where Nanaka threatened Iori, is the same day as the Scum Bros group sob session, which is why I mentioned Iori's comfort fit here, as it reinforces that assumption now that he's changed into the outfit he wore during episodes 6 and 8 of season 1, basically a fit he wears out of the home. In what the manga refers to as a ticket contest, the Scum Bros each take turns giving 2-minute pitches to Chisa as to why they should be the ones that she takes to Omi Women's University Festival with. During Kohei's turn, I can schizophrenically hear the laughter directed towards me from the animators over at Zero G when he pulls out another Series F bill in the year 2018. Sending this video's credibility into a free fall. Later, before Iori's turn, we got a shot of a clock that reads 3:05 p.m, meaning the first year mechanical engineers at Izuyu end their day around 2:45ish p.m. Since we need to account for the 2 minutes used by Mitarai, Yamamoto, Kohei, and Nojima for their individual pitches, equaling to 8 minutes. We also need to factor in the time it took for the 6 of them to vacate the room earlier, along with adding in the setup time for the pitches, like writing all of their names out on the chalkboard. Anyway, the pitches end in a free-for-all brawl between the Scum Bros, and we get a time skip back to Grand Blue, where we know it's the same day as the ticket contest, as it's now nighttime and Iori is wearing the same clothes, along with the band-aid on his face from the aforementioned fight. Something worth noting here is in the anime, this part seems to have been on the next day, as the establishing shot of Grand Blue in there is actually set during the daytime. And it's a good thing the anime changed it in my case, but at the same time, it's a bit odd considering that the Kotegawas and Iori are eating omelets at night now, which we've seen them eat for breakfast before in episode 7 of season 1. Anyway, to recap, there's no way to tell what days episode 4 takes place on, aside from that it's during mid-July. But we do know that in the first day, the girls' party plotline occurs, and in the next, Nanaka threatens Iori, followed by the Scum Bros ticket contest, and ends the night of with Iori telling his family that he's going to the Omi Fest, featuring a very, very deflated Chisa. Episode 5 opens on a brand new day after an unspecified short time skip. I say this episode occurs shortly after 4 because the big current event is the Omi Women's University Festival, which logically should have been within a relatively close time proximity to the ticket contest. Though much like the previous episodes, there are no clues in this one to pinpoint it onto the calendar. That is until next episode, which takes place on the same day as this one. But before that, this episode starts with a monologue from Iori about how he and Kohei ended up working at the Keiki Cafe. But shortly after that reveal, we flash back 1 hour, which is a manga only detail, to earlier in the day where the 4 leads meet up before the Keiki Cafe opened. If we skip towards the end of the chapter, there's another manga only detail that reads that the Keiki Cafe's first phase starts at 9 AM, which is likely also when they open. Using what we know, this current scene could be around 8 AM. And with this, we also learn that the Kaya concert is likely around 4 PM-ish via this line.
あと8時間以上あるんだけど。
However, this will get complicated in the next episode's part of this video, but I'll save that headache for later. Anyway, our beloved 4 leads then work for an unspecified amount of time until Azusa arrives and borrows Kohei for episode 6 reasons, leading us to the second half of the episode with a small time skip of a few hours, say around noontime-ish, indicated by these establishing shots of the festival, where then the Scum Bros arrive. Mithrai notes as currently hot. Usually I'd consult the weather records for something like this, but due to its subjective nature without evidence in this instance, our scope of time is so expanded that it's just too hard to zero in on an exact date based on that line alone. But we can use deductive reasoning to establish an obvious point here. See, I skipped it earlier, but we found out that Aina's 3 non-peekaboo friends, Kyoko, Kanako, and Keiko, are all working at the Keiki Cafe as well, and they recognize Iori and Kohei from their first meeting during the season 1 episode 5 mixer. And likewise, the anime changes out these vague panels of the Keiki Cafe environment with Aina's 3 friends here, to have Nojima and Yamamoto remember that same mixer as well. What does this mean? Given how all 7 of the associated characters all remember each other here, it's easy to assume that the mixer wasn't too long ago, which doesn't really help with this portion of the video, but at least we know that this episode isn't set that far into the future, where they would forget that shared experience. Say like 2025. Though something a little contradictory is that, way later near the end of the episode, after the Scum Bros learn that there are 2 phases of the Keiki Cafe, it seems that Iori, Nojima, and Yamamoto all forgot how attractive Kanako looked without Keiki makeup on, from that time at the mixer. Granted, they did go drinking afterwards, and maybe they just forgot that fact because they only saw that photo briefly? That, and they must have been going ham for even Nojima and Yamamoto to strip while drinking too, despite not actually being Peekaboo members. But back to the present time, Iori sabotages the Scum Bros' plans to pick up girls at the festival, and has all of them barring Fujiwara removed from the Keiki Cafe all before 2 PM. This is further reinforced from the panel from earlier, as the time is now 2 PM, where the Keiki Cafe enters phase 2, and will go until 6 PM. And yeah, that's it. This is the first one-day only episode in the Grand Blue anime so far. And to recap, episode 5 takes place on a brand new day sometime after episode 4, which I'll tell you right now is currently July 27th, where the 4 first years meet up at Omiyu around 8 AM, start working at the Keiki Cafe at 9 AM, and a few hours later the Scum Bros plotline occurs and lasts until 2 PM, where they get kicked out, where the episode ends in a cliffhanger kinda, which is another first for the Grand Blue anime. Additionally, during the episode preview, Iori says this,
いおりです。暑い日が続きますが、夏バテなどしていませんか?
which means it's currently still during summertime, reconfirming our summer time frame. Alright, on to episode 6. Spoilers for the end of this segment, there's a full moon in this episode. Though there will be a tiny road bump with it too. But anyway, 6 is a connecting episode to 5 in terms of chronology, as it picks up exactly where the latter left off, which we've established would be a little after 2 PM, aka when the Keiki Cafe enters phase 2. But you'll soon learn that this is on July 27th, and the order of events go like this. The Scum Bros try and fail to sneak back into the festival again, Azusa provides them an inn, only if they agree to help her friend set up for the Kaya concert, which is where she she took Kohei to in the previous episode. There, the Scumbros get jealous of him for getting best girl and her friend's attention, and devise a plan to borrow his clout. After drinking together for a while, Kohei leaves to go to the Kaya concert before 5:42 p.m. There are a few indicators that small time skips occurred throughout the episode, signified by establishing shots of the concert venue, but the only real times we have to go off of are from Kohei's messages to Iori. After best girl steals his ticket, Kohei panics and sends these, where the times are manga only detail, and this is where we'll have to go a little out of order. But considering you're watching this video, chances are you already watched Grand Blue Season 2, so it's not really a spoiler, I guess. Anyway, this mini timeline should go like this. Kohei leaves to go to the concert at what we can only guess is after 5 p.m. and realizes that his ticket is lost at 5:42 and messages Iori that there is no time at 5:47. And if we use concert logic, this is likely when Kohei reached an entry checkpoint and was scrambling because he didn't have his ticket, since Nojima said this previously. Later, we find out that he went to Azusa's friend for help and she got him in, where we know that he at least made it in time for the start of the concert via this line. While we can't account for the location and distance Kohei traveled, I think it's still plausible for him to get Azusa's friend help, along with making it back in time for the concert within 13 minutes, when comparing walk-in commute times with when I was in college. Which, of course, we're assuming the concert started at the top of an hour, which I'm gonna go ahead and assume would be at 6 p.m. However, this is where the roadblock comes in, because back in episode 5, it was established the concert would have started 8 hours from when the leads all met up. And if we subtract 8 hours from 6 p.m, that lands us at 10 a.m, which we know is after the Keiki Cafe opened its doors. Though my only real explanation for this is gonna have to be in the semantics of it all, as Aina passes the reliable narrator test in this context since she literally knows Kaya, but it just seems that she just maybe misremembered the start time and or got the math slightly wrong, and or again just gave Kohei an estimate. Like, for example, say it's currently 6 p.m. and you have a doctor's appointment tomorrow at 3 p.m. You can say your appointment is a day away even though it's actually only 21 hours away. And I'm guessing Aina did something like that here. At least that's gonna be my cope to keep the timeline in order. Anyway, let's wrap up the episode. After the concert ends, the Scumbros meet up again, where we get a full moon shot, which was present in the manga as well. And this was the first one of the season. That is, if you're not counting the flashback from Shiori's arc. And if you were to remember from earlier, July had a full moon on the 27th, which I'm gonna go with for the remainder of this video, as there wouldn't be enough time to get to where the manga is currently, if the current arc was actually set in August or September. As at the time of recording, the latest chapter is explicitly in December. Alright, after the Omi festival, we get a time skip to the following day. It's not explicitly or confirmed to be one day later, but it's easy to assume that it is, as Iori hasn't spoken to Chisa about what happened previously until now. That and using my IRL experience, Kohei is deep into post-concert afterglow. I mean, look at him. I unironically made that face too after this happened to me. Alright, that does it for this one. To recap, episode 6 is a continuation of episode 5 and spans across 2 days, wherein day 1, the 27th, the Omi Women's University Festival takes place. And the major events during it, in order, include the Keiki Cafe opening at 9 a.m, the setup for the Kaya concert after 2 p.m, post-setup where the Scumbros meet Sakurako, Natsume, and Yuki, and finally, the Kaya concert, which we're gonna assume is at 6 p.m. And then the following day, the 28th, the first years convene at Grand Blue along with Kanoko, and we get payoff for how goated our MC and Deuteragonus are. Alright, next one. Episode 7 is narratively a pretty long one, all things considered, as the first half and second half are split up by an unspecified time skip, and the ending of the second half also has another time skip. But let's break it down a bit. The first clue about this episode is that the first half goes through a full duration of a thunderstorm, and the only way this works is if episodes 6 and 7 are connected sequentially, if we're to assume it's still in July, that is. Though for August, there'd be a bit more leeway, but I'll tell you why I don't think that works a little later. But back to the first half of the episode, it adapts the Sharpie Impact Test chapter, and the timeline clues include, before the lab begins, we see an overcast shot of Izuyu, and halfway through the lab, it's straight up pouring with lightning and everything. And after the lab, the storm clears up. We know that this occurs during the morning because there's a shot of a clock in the lab that reads 10 a.m. Obviously, this doesn't work with either the July or August dates, but the second half of the episode will place more weight into the July theory again. So just keep July 28th in the back of your mind for now. Speaking of, the second half of the episode adapts the camping trip storyline, which seems completely detached from the Sharpie Impact Test chapter in both the manga and anime. With that being said, it starts in the morning to noontime, with the first years on a road trip to go to an abandoned elementary school for their club camping trip. The manga does a better job of showing the school's distance from Izu, as the road trip sequence in there is much longer, while the anime chose to trim it down to fit it within the half-episode time slot, unfortunately. However, something to note is, during the road trip, Chisa reveals this after playing Iori's self-composed song,
この前しおりちゃんに手紙を書いたんだけど
which implies episode 2 took place a while ago, and given how we placed that on July 6th to 9th, I'd say 20 plus days would relatively qualify for that. The four leads arrive at the school around dusk, which means they've been driving for quite a few hours. After sundown, we see out-of-frame moonlight in multiple shots, which helps us narrow down that this episode could not have taken place during a new moon date. Interestingly enough, the manga has a shot of a slightly obscured foolish-looking moon in this panel, while the anime does not. Either way, we know that there's sufficient moonlight to at least illuminate certain shots, meaning both parts of this episode have to be relative to July 27th, aka the date of episode 5 and most of 6, as we previously established that there was a full moon on that date, which means this plotline is likely within the first week of August. This would also eliminate the rainy August dates of the 7th and 8th from the Sharpie Impact Test portion from earlier, as there wouldn't be sufficient moonlight during that cycle to illuminate the nighttime scenes. Anyway, the camping trip lasts one night, and then this panel from the manga occurs on the following day. And finally, the episode closes out with Iori starting his new job on a brand new day. There's no way to be able to tell how much time has passed since the camping trip and his first day of work, but enough time has to have had passed for him to get interviewed and hired, which I want to guess is at least 1 week, but I'm not going to lock that in. To recap, episode 7 has to have taken place on the same day as the end of episode 6, aka the morning of the 28th, where the Scum Bros attend Ask Prof Ushironomiya's lab with the Sharpie Impact Test around 10 AM. And during the next week, Peekaboo holds a one-day camping trip at an abandoned elementary school. The following day, Chisa starts feeling embarrassment for getting drunk at said camping trip, and a few days later, Iori starts his new job with the best girl in all of media history. Episode 8 picks up right where 7 ends with Iori discovering that Sakurako is his new co-worker, which unfortunately we still don't have a date for, but I'll kind of spoil my own video by saying it's likely early to mid-August at this point, which I'll elaborate upon in the next episode. Something to note though is there's a clock in these shots, however due to the characters' heads, lighting, and or framing, the arms are obscured in all of them. But it's safe to assume that it's currently around morning to noonish. Later when Iori's hazing training continues, Sakurako says this,
あと30分そのままでね
which is accompanied by a time skip shot of the diner, and followed by us the viewers learning that enough time has passed where Otoya is now on break, presumably lunch break, since he offers to cook staff meals for Iori and Sakurako, who are also about to go on break as well. There's another unspecified time skip where we flash back to Grand Blue. There's no way to confirm if this is the next day, but it's easy to assume that it is, since given her nature, Nanaka would have asked about Iori's fatigueness earlier, had it been over a day since his training with Sakurako. Also, we get to see that Iori's phone reads that it's 3:07 PM, meaning his shift is either likely at 3:30 or 4 PM. Later that day, Nanaka has the Peekaboo girls check in on Iori for a little, and the manga has this panel, which means at least 3 days have passed before the second half of the episode, where it's on a brand new day, specifically in the morning due to the greeting lines from Otoya and Sakurako as they meet Peekaboo. Something to note is the time gap between episodes 6 and 8 can't be too large, since Sakurako clearly still remembers Kohei, but he doesn't her, for other reasons. Later, Peekaboo and Iori's co-workers all go on 2 dives, which ends around dusk, and the episode closes with the sun about to set, which should be around 7 PM. To recap, episode 8 takes place on the same unknown early to mid-August day at the end of episode 7, where Iori learns that Sakurako is gonna make work hell for him. He then meets Otoya, and on the following day, they learn that they're both divers, and a few days later, at least 3, Iori's co-workers and Peekaboo meet and go on 2 dives, and the episode ends around sunset. Finally, episode 9 has a ton of clock shots, along with not 1, but 2 moonshots on different days. Alright, let's backtrack a little though. Episode 9 opens where 8 closes around dusk on an unknown early to mid-August date. During this, Peekaboo does what Peekaboo does best, and that's party. Or at least 2 of them do. With that being said, our first 2 clock shots unfortunately don't have any visible arms, but that's okay, because on a later day, we get one that has one arm pointing downwards at around the 28-minute mark. It's likely that this is still around noontime, as the hour arm isn't seen between 5 to 8. As for how I know that this is not the following day after the dives, despite this being the first time Iori and Sakurako have seen each other since said dives, via Iori being oblivious as to why he's getting punished, he says this line,
この前全然効果がなかったように見えたが
referring to the scene as happening the other day, rather than yesterday. This means that they have not shared shifts in at least one day now. Later at night on the same day, we know that via this line,
じゃあ後で作戦会議だな
オッケー上がったら最終号ね
Iori and Sakurako go to Bar Roots for a strategy meeting with Kohei, Kotobuki, and Tokita. And the day ends with a waxing crescent moonshot. It's worth noting that the manga has it as a full moon for this chapter, but remember something anime precedents. As for the date, I'll save that for when we get to our second moonshot. On the following day, we get another clock shot that reads 10:56 AM, and Sakurako has a flashback to Tokita and Kotobuki's advice, which kinda implies that that was the previous night. Also, since Iori comes to work with the necessary equipment from said advice. A lot of plot happens and it is now nighttime where a super goated scene plays out, and during it we get this moonshot. Obviously it's still a waxing crescent, meaning this episode must still take place in August, since the remainder of July after episode 7 has no more available dates for waxing crescents, and also is likely around the 14th and 15th range. And I'm gonna go on a limb and say that the first day with the strategy meeting was the 14th, and the current day, the 15th. Anyway, on the next day, the 16th, at 8:24 AM, we see Otoya, Sakurako, and Iori back at work. And we know one day passed via this line.
だからあんたも昨日のあれは忘れなさい
Sakurako then hands Iori an apology gift to give to Kohei. And this chapter's final panel shows that she went shopping to get that gift, sometime between July 27th and now, August 16th, since that was when episode 6 occurred. Later that night, after Iori gets off work, Aina messages him asking him on a movie date for Saturday the 18th, which will set up the time frame for episode 10, where I'll explain that date. And that's where the episode ends. To recap, this was a 4-day episode, the first day being non-consecutive with the other 3. On some date in early to mid-August, was the episode 9 plotline where Sakurako and Otoya meet and dive with Peekaboo, which is also where this episode starts on. At least 2 days later, on August 14th, Iori and Sakurako go to work like normal, and then go to Bar Roots at night for a strategy meeting with the male Peekaboo members. The next day, the 15th, Sakurako asks out and gets rejected by Otoya, and she then finds comfort in Iori that night. The following day, the 16th, the 3 diner employees all clear the air at work, and after a shift at night, Iori gets asked out by Aina. This episode has more timeline clues and hints than any of the others in both seasons combined. With that being said, episode 10 starts with a small recap scene of Aina asking out Iori, followed by a location swap to Aina's apartment, where we see a full moon shot in the manga, but later you'll learn that the anime keeps it consistent with the previous episode's waxing crescent. Currently the date is still July 16th, as the Aina scenes are happening concurrently with the end of the last episode. If we check the calendar, July 16th, 2018 was on a Thursday. Their date is set on a Saturday, meaning it's gonna be on the 18th, specifically starting at 2 PM via Iori's messages here. 2 days pass and it's currently a little before 2 PM on July 18th, where both Aina and Iori are early. Here we get a pretty complete time frame for their movie date, as we see that Iori got tickets for a 2:20 showing for Outbox, meaning 20 minutes have passed including the train ride and the walk to the theater. There, we see that there are other time slots for the 3 movies that the other first years would have wanted to watch, where we can see that this showing of Outbox ends at 4 PM, making it a 90-minute film. Iori and Aina then watch it, meaning their viewing ends at 3:50 PM. 10 minutes pass as they exit the theater and look up a place to eat, as the anime explicitly says that the current time is 4 PM, while the manga has it at 4:02. It's also important to note that Nikuball, the izakaya at the top, is set to open at 5 PM. With that, we can assume that between 4 and 5, Iori and Aina spent that time shopping, along with possibly other activities like walking around, as they do end up going to Nikuball after 5 PM. We don't know when they leave, but I don't personally think it's at 12 AM, aka when the izakaya closes. They return to Grand Blue and Azusa and Iori go on a walk, where we can see multiple moonshots, which does reconfirm that only a few days have passed since the last moonshots we got, which is really good attention to detail, that the moon in episode 10 is getting fuller as time progresses. Okay, this is where things get a little odd, as in the manga the two return in the same night, where it's implied that Iori tells Kohei that Aina is leaving Izu. But the anime skips this sequence and flashes to the morning of a brand new day. Using this manga panel, we can apply it to the anime to uncover that the date is indeed the 19th. Plot happens and the first years barring Aina go to Kohei's apartment to find goods to auction off. Later in that same day at what appears to be noontime. We know that this is the same day as all three of them are still wearing the same clothes they did in the morning. Later around golden hour, the three can be seen walking back, presumably to Grand Blue. And since Kohei is still physically holding Toshio's wetsuit, it further reinforces the same day theory. And there's a time skip to a new morning. We don't technically know what day this is on, but I'm semi-confident in saying that this is the following day, aka the 20th, as we see that Iori, Chisa, and Kohei all set up a spot for Aina in a detached room. And if we use Grand Blue logic, the allocated time for this would easily be sub 1 day, as if you remember from season 1 episode 2, the Peekaboo Boys were able to redecorate Iori's room in 4 different ways in the span of a few hours, one of which was soloed by Kohei, meaning likely only 1 day has passed here. Later, we do get a couple clock shots, but again, no arms, so kinda useless to us. And here the news officially drops that Aina will be returning home, and the episode ends. To recap, episode 10 is a super thorough and simple one that spans across 4 days, as it starts with Aina asking out Iori on the 16th, followed by their actual date on the 18th, and the following day, Iori, Chisa, and Kohei take part in the auction house plotline on the 19th, and on the 20th, Peekaboo break the news that Aina will be leaving Izu. Episode 11 is kinda hard to place on the calendar, because for one, in the manga it should chronologically take place after chapter 40, which states that it's been around a week since Aina left, meaning it's currently relatively recent to episode 10's ending. And without going on too much of a tangent, this chapter spans for at least 10 days, making the manga's chronology well into September now. But here's where it gets messy. Episode 11 forsakes this chapter completely, as the panels referencing it are straight up not adapted. So I want to say that the anime is still in August right now, but there's literally no clues as to when this episode should take place outside of off-screen moonshine shots later. Either way, all we know that this episode has to be after episode 10, since Aina is no longer in Izu. With that being said, we get a clock shot in the opening scene, which if we really zoom in and enhance, we can barely see the ends of 2 arms, which currently reads as around 4 PM, where Nanaka comes in talking about how there could be a potential trip tomorrow. And that tomorrow arrives, and we see Peekaboo and friends gathered at a dock around morning, where they set sail for the uninhabited island. A lot of plot occurs and the day goes from noon to dusk to night. Usually I'd recap it here, but I'll save that for the next episode since they share connecting days. But so far we still don't know what the dates for this episode could be on, but we do know that it can't be on new moon dates, aka early September. I should note that there is a full moon shot in the manga, which would technically work with our time frame still, with a variance of roughly 2 weeks. And honestly, somehow this is the actual date of this episode, which you'll find out very soon. And soon is right now! Episode 12 picks up where the previous ends, where Iori jumps off a cliff only to find Kudo. At the bottom of said cliff, we get like 4 full moon shots that confirm that it's currently the 26th of August. It's kind of obvious, but I have to include it here. After Kudo eats the Mukago, Kohei notes that they're in season during fall, meaning it's still summertime for us. I know this, you know this, but I have to be thorough. Also, there's a little tidbit that kinda confirms that this episode can't take place in September via the manga. The following day is where this volume cover comes from, and takes place on the 27th. We know that this is directly 1 day after because Iori explicitly refers to the Chisa chase incident as happening last night twice. That and the way these shots transition kinda just lead you to assume that anyway. Backtracking a little though, during the morning, Iori and Kohei have fun with the senpais. And the gang head back to Izu afterwards, and arrive around dinner time, where later Iori drops this line. That tomorrow comes and the manga has a 205 Grand Blue Classic, which doesn't make sense here, so anyway, there's a diving sequence that occurs in the morning, and the remainder of the episode plays out during golden hour. Something, we have 2 obscured clock shots, but we already know that it's around dusk, so it doesn't really matter all too much this time. And yeah, that's about it. The final shot of this episode foreshadows season 3, with a beautiful establishing shot of the best building in fiction. So to recap episode 11 and 12, the former starts on the 25th, where Azusa and Iori organize a party to go to an uninhabited island. On the 26th, aka the full moon date, the gang head to the island and have Grand Blue patented summertime fun with members of Tinkerbell and Sakurako and her friends. Where the night of, Iori jumps off a cliff and discovers Kudo. Plot happens and Otoya and Kohei wind up in the same ditch, where they learn that the Peekaboo Senpais will be retiring soon. They eventually get rescued by Tokita and Kotobuki, where the day shifts to the 27th, and the Peekaboo members, barring Chisa, continue having fun on the island. Later, everyone returns to Izu, and the Kotegawas and Iori return to Grand Blue for dinner, and the day ends. Finally, on the 28th, the Kotegawas plus Iori go on one last dive for the season, followed by the two first years clearing up the misunderstanding from the 27th, and the installation of the senpai send-off as the main plotline. And that's it! Granblue Season 2 seems to start one day after the finale of Season 1 on July 4th, and ends on August 28th. Meaning that Season 2 is roughly 2 months in duration. If you remember from the part 1 of this video, Season 1 started in April and ended in July, meaning Season 2 is 1 whole month shorter in terms of chronology, which personally I think is reflected in the storytelling, as the time skips in Season 2 felt a lot smaller and scarce compared to Season 1. Well, that might be the case. While working on this video, I found it way harder to pinpoint dates, mainly because of the whole Kohei Yun situation. I mentioned this because with Season 3 being confirmed, I wanted to let you, the viewer, know that I'll be sticking with 2018 for that season as well. Even though Season 2 logically has to be in 2025, but canonically has to be in 2018. That's gonna do it for me. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Granblue chronology. I've been reading the comments from the last video and honestly I'm touched. I can't thank you enough. Those words mean a lot. And I'll see you next week when we find out who's right and which tastes better, choco rooms or choco cones.